Alright. Good morning and welcome to the Omaha Beach Sprint Review 5 video. Our team composition has remained the same. Our product vision is reiterated on the screen. Here is our product roadmap. Major feature additions in Sprint 5 include 2 successful App Store submissions and the ability for the user to manipulate 3D models in the AR space. Our sprint goal was to finish all planned work on the app and achieve a successful submission of the working application onto the App Store. Primary tasks for this sprint included finishing mapping buttons in Xcode, fixing previously mapped buttons that were not working well, implementing the 3D models, and producing a poster for Projects Day. Here's our burndown chart. Our capacity for this sprint was 168 hours, and our actual hours were 193. My primary task for this sprint was to create the Projects Day poster. The poster is divided into 3 areas. The middle section is an overview of the application as a whole. The product vision, outcomes, and key features are presented. The left section focuses on augmented reality and its use in the app, along with information about the user interface. The right side of the poster focuses on historical content of the application. The historical draft path is shown, along with a representation of the application storyboard.
Hi, this is Cadet Nappergrant from the history element of the team, and I'm here to talk to you about what I did for this last sprint review headed into Projects Day. Big thing that Jeremy and I did was finally have our final content review with Dr. Waddell, in which we went over the content both for stylistic choices and just double checking all of our facts, and we corrected some minor language usage while also omitting certain names so as to respect those who were dead, as well as to ensure that there's no issues with their families potentially not being happy with the light in which their relatives are portrayed, because frankly some bad things happened on Omaha Beach, and we do highlight those, though we'd like to do so in a respectful manner. Moving forward, aside from those minor edits, a big function that we added into this new version of the app are these images right here. Let me zoom in for you. So these pictures here within the app help to guide the user as far as visually when they're actually going to be looking at the 3D map. For the purposes of time, we didn't implement any new functionality on the map itself, but we did take the suggestions from the last sprint and wanted to really implement something that at least gave context to where somebody was in the map. And this is just a quick terrain guide that helps initially orient the individual. We talk about things like Fox Green sector versus Easy Red sector of the beach. And then you have where Wienerstedt and S62 would have been located at this region, the exit E3 or Colville draw, and then Wienerstedt and S61, which isn't pictured on our map, but we do reference it, is off there to the left. And what this really does is it helps give the initial experience some direction, and then throughout the app itself you can see various modules where we make it more specific and keep the user in context of what's happening as they're going through the app and seeing the experience as a whole. And the last thing I'll highlight is just to look at one of the modules in which last time you also requested to see what kind of story we're telling, and I'm just going to quickly read a summary for you to tell you kind of what the language is. So it says, here's the summary here. No other operation in the entirety of the war was as thoroughly planned as Overlord. Months of reconnaissance, intelligence operations, and rehearsals worked to shape and refine the plan ahead of the actual invasion. However, for such a massive operation, every stage of D-Day was planned down to the minute. Combined with an overconfidence in fires and new technology, such as the DD tank, the first waves that hit the beach encountered stiff resistance that destroyed the meticulously crafted timeline. With very little room for adjustment to the friction of battle, the entire day seemed in jeopardy. The weight of the entire war was about to fall on the shoulders of a few brave men. And that draws the user in, while also moves the story forward to where they're landing in the next module. However, if they are interested, they can go into more about the planning process, specifically the bombardment, how that went, the thought process behind using tanks at D-Day, the description of the DD tank itself, what actually happened when they used the DD tank, and then ultimately what happened from the bombardment as the soldiers are just about to hit the beach. And then lastly, we have the DD tank itself, which I can highlight here when I look at the 3D model.
Hello, I'm Cadet Jeremy Beasley. For this sprint, the history team finalized the historical content in the app. We finished the 2 modules, Knife Fight on the Seas and Port of Liberation, and edited the content that we had already written for clarity and continuity. We also selected, imported, and wrote a brief description for all the pictures in the app. Here is one of the completed modules for app. It's titled Finding a Hole, and it tells the story of Lieutenant Spaulding's boat section from their approach to the beach to the first German machine gun that this section was able to take. The focus of this module is to train to our app users the face of battle. We wanted to let them feel how Spaulding and his men felt on D-Day. Having contextualized the experience in the preceding modules, we go into closer detailed description of what he and his men did that day on the beach. As you can see, we first have a brief summary of the contents of the modules that will facilitate a streamlined experience of the app to our users. Then we have the first section titled Fortunate Landing, which tells the story of how Spaulding's boat section found themselves in a relatively unguarded section of the beach. Then we have the Slog, which tells the story of how Spaulding's section struggled from their landing craft to the shore. Then we have the Roman Ruins, where Spaulding and his men blow a hole in some beach obstacles to reach their first substantial cover position. And finally, we have the German Gunners, in which Spaulding's men take the first German machine gun position. Following these sections, we have our screens for our 3D models, the M1 Garand and the Bangalore Torpedo. The M1 Garand picture was obtained from the National Park Service. And then we have a brief description of what the M1 Garand was, and this helps contextualize the M1 Garand. Similarly, we have the Bangalore Torpedo. This picture is a screen capture of our 3D model, followed by a brief description of what the Bangalore Torpedo was, and then the 3D model. That is all.
This is Cadet Shoki Chacon, and my contribution to this sprint consisted of finalizing the Figma design, but it mostly consisted of taking the work here done by the history majors, filling out each of the modules, and porting it over into Figma so that we can finalize the design that we've been working on for the past couple semesters. This is now a fully functioning app where each of the buttons are fully fleshed out and you can navigate throughout the app, and that was a big part of my contribution for this sprint. I also represented the group at Picatinny Arsenal and took a lot of feedback that we will incorporate into our Projects Day presentation.
Cadet Harrison, and for this sprint, my main task was to put our app on the App Store. During this sprint, I made 2 successful submissions to the App Store, and now version 2.2 of our app is on the App Store. Additionally, I worked with Cadet Gamara and Cadet Lachey to add additional historical content that the history majors created during the sprint to our app. And I also added the button functionality to each of the app screens, and that concludes my part of the brief.
This is Cadet Lachey. What I did this sprint primarily consisted of ensuring buttons were placed in view controllers, mapping buttons to the respective view controllers of segues, including add 3D models into project by configuring them into textures, as well as creating new classes for each model into code. While some models, such as the tank, were self-explanatory with the labeling of the materials and textures that apply, such as the 75mm gun, and the textures are also labeled as 75mm gun for that part of the tank, so they map together very naturally and it doesn't take much work. Some other models, such as the Destroyer, happens to contain many different materials, and it actually totals into the hundreds, and the textures that apply to them are very ambiguous, such as clicking on one individual rung of this part of the ship would be considered material 1177. However, there's no texture with a name that fits that, so I essentially have to play a guessing game with figuring out what texture would apply to which material, as all the materials are very ambiguously labeled on the Destroyer model. Another issue that comes in hand specifically for the Destroyer and tank model is the size of the models tend to push the application's running memory, where it could almost become a concern if the application will crash, and this will be mitigated by optimizing the models by deciding on which textures to apply or how to apply the texture to minimize the size of the overall model so it won't crash the application.
Hello, this is Cadet Gamara. I will now walk you through my work for our final sprint with Omaha Beach AR. First and foremost, in a combined effort with Cadet Bradley Harrison, we were able, while utilizing Figma and Xcode, to integrate the entirety of the historical content into the app. It is now in the App Store. This is where the majority of my work was executed. Furthermore, I was tasked with completing an in-depth upgrade of the README on GitHub with a dummy-proof instruction for the following groups that will pick up our project and continue it. Overall, completed a lot of work with regards to the historical content. As was mentioned earlier, we had to download multiple files and deal with the ever-changing criteria for the history majors from the customer. So after integrating that, we had to make further changes, and then we furthermore implemented it into the app. This concludes my summary of work for the final sprint.